So our primary topic today is talking about the technology adoption challenges of the 21st century lawyer. Many of us who've been in this business for a long time have really seen sort of an evolution in what the lawyer role has become. Subject matter expertise on one part of the law is absolutely required. But when it comes to serving the needs of the client and the forward thinking that's going on in our firm, sometimes that really isn't enough anymore. And we really need to be attentive to what sort of the technology skill set an effective lawyer needs to have to practice in this century. In another challenge I'm sure we're all aware of, knowing the jobs that many of you have looking through the attendee list, is if we've learned anything through our time working with innovation and technology and law, that we are not on Kevin Costner's farm. Just because we build it does not mean they are going to come and use it. And that is where the adoption challenge really comes in. And what further complicates it, we have many different departments within the firm who have a role to play in our lawyers effectively practicing. And then one of the topics we also want to touch on today is how can we create an effective intersection of those departments to really most effectively serve this need for adoption. Before we jump into the discussion, though, I want to take a moment to introduce myself and then have the panelists do the same. So as you heard from Alicia, my name is John Grant. I recently joined LAC Wilson Allen as the Vice President of Growth Initiatives. Prior to that, I spent 2 decades in leadership roles at Baker McKenzie and Greenberg Traurig, working primarily in the areas of innovation, knowledge management, and practice development. And in the decade before that, I was a practicing tax lawyer. So insert your own joke there, as always do when tax lawyers come up. But I also encourage you not to do the math on my age. I think the stylish hair and the color of my beard speaks for itself. So with that introduction, I'd like to throw it to Leslie.
Thank you, John, and thank you for inviting me to join you today. My name is Leslie Brown. I am the Director of Client Value at Blank Rome. I joined the firm late last year. Prior to joining Blank Rome, I've been in, I was a software consultant and then a practicing IP litigator. And when I left the practice side of the house, I moved to knowledge management and legal project management and landed in innovation. So I am now at Blank Rome, heading up their innovation effort, working on things that we can do to benefit our clients. Thank you. I'll pass it to Kermit.
Morning, everybody. Nice to be with you all. I'm Kermit Wallace. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Day Pitney. We're a law firm that's essentially up and down the East Coast. We have about a dozen or 13 offices. I've been in legal technology since the late 90s. So like John, I'd ask you not to make assumptions about my age. Prior to Day Pitney, I was at Strzok & Levan in New York City, and prior to Strzok was at Cravath, Swaine & Moore. Before that, investment banks, some software companies, but legal technology has become my home. So I hope anything I can provide on the webinar today is helpful to from those viewpoints.
John?
And John Attinger, Senior Director of Training at Wilson Allen HBR. Been in this field for 20 plus years, working in-house at different law firms and now helping law firms with technology adoption, rollout, and change management. So bringing that element of this conversation to the table.
Oh, thank you very much. And so let's just sort of proceed. I will make one observation. People think innovation is the game of the young, but apparently you need the vintage and scars of experience to talk about difficult topics like adoption. So we'll begin with that. The lawyer in me absolutely cannot resist the temptation to kind of start this discussion by defining an important term. And that term, I think I'd like to, hear a little bit of definition of from our panel is adoption. I think a lot of times we talk about training and adoption as if it's all sitting in the same bowl and it's kind of the same thing. Leslie, let's start with you. Where do you see the distinction between what's adoption and what's training, and what unique challenges that can present?
Well, I think I'll make it very simplistic. I look at training is learning how to use a tool. So someone shows you how to do something and you ingest that, and hopefully you'll remember how to do it when you need it. Whereas adoption is really taking whatever it is that you've learned and incorporating it into how you get your work done. So you don't have to think about it. It's just part of your workflow. You've now embraced, if it's technology or a new process, and you've truly adopted it into your work. Yeah,
and Kermit, from your perspective, from the top of the IT ladder, is where is your definition maybe a little different and where is it the same?
I think a lot of it is the same. You know, adoption is a pretty strong word, and that means that you've really taken something in and you're using it. It is part of your psyche. It's part of your operation. It's not conformity, right? Adoption is, this is how you do something. And so for us in a role where attorneys, are very intelligent, they're very capable, they may have ways of doing things. We then train them to potentially do it a little bit differently, but getting them to actually adopt it and go, that's better. That's where I make the distinction. One other thing I'd say, an example I've always used or used in the past is people talk about fruit and vegetables, and there's training and adoption. Well, they're not the same thing. Same way fruit and vegetables both are healthy and have their own impact on you. Training is one thing, adoption is another. Fruits are one thing, vegetables are another. So there's a viewpoint.
I want to build upon what Kermit said there when talking about adoption and getting people to build things into their processes. You can't force people to adopt something. It can't be a top-down dictate that everyone has to use this product. That's just making something a requirement. If you have really succeeded in people adopting a new process or a new technology, it's because they see the benefit to using it. They see that there's a reason to do this and it actually benefits them, it benefits the client, it makes things work just better. So I think adoption, when you're thinking about adoption, you really have to emphasize how it's going to improve what people are currently doing and how it's going to make the life better.
The trainer and change manager in me says, I agree.
Well, exactly. And I sort of compare it to a real life example. It's, every one of my evenings now is full of helping my high school freshmen with math, right? And there's a big difference. To me, training math is she's memorized the formula. Adopting that formula is when she can see a new problem she hasn't seen before, recognize that formula needs to be applied, and actually create value in that process by applying that formula. So it's to me, that's like a relatable story. One interesting about legal tech is we already established that all of us have been around this for a while, but one thing that I find stunning that really impacts this question we're dealing with today is just how the speed has accelerated. The new things are coming on. It almost feels daily. Things are just accelerating. What I'd love to throw to the panel is sort of, what surprised you about that acceleration? And when you have so many new things coming at one time, how does that create additional challenges in the adoption journey?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. It is coming at us at an ever accelerating pace. And unlike, I think we're talking about kind of recent leaps in AI, it's not a new technology, but the explosive use of it just in the last couple of months, we've never seen anything get so much usage. I won't necessarily say adoption yet, but we haven't seen this type of interest in a technology. And I actually think it's great because people who, especially within law firms, who in the past weren't that interested in what was going on in tech, let alone legal tech, are now seeing that they can't ignore it. And they see that it's here and they're going to have to incorporate it into their practices. So I actually am excited that there's something out there that's getting people to focus, and it helps them focus on the other technologies that are available as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, anything that, well, this is the funny dilemma, right? Well, adoption is always easier when you have enthusiastic lawyers to work with. But when the amount of information exchange on places like LinkedIn and the public conversations in the practice of law takes their enthusiasm and puts it 30 yards down the field from your current reality, that creates kind of an interesting push and pull of adoption, right? Like, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's integrate some of the things we have today. Let's think about the future, but it's sort of a push-pull there. Kermit, any of your thoughts? It's obviously on the chat GPT and things like that coming. How are you seeing that reflected in your attorney population and on this adoption journey?
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, certainly, and Leslie raised an excellent point about the AI tools, there is a consumerization a lot of these tools. And we've seen this happen before, right? For BlackBerry and then iPhone, the internet, right? There were these things that were sort of edge cases and then suddenly weren't, and they were everywhere. And in many cases now we're getting adoption before we're getting training. And John, I mean, you just alluded to this, right? People are going and they're starting to do things and then coming back and going, should I be doing this? How best to do this? And we're going, I don't even know how to spell what you're asking about. So there's definitely a speed factor here that we have to consider. And right, that's our obligation to our firms and to our clients, is to be as forward looking and as up to speed on these things as possible. And to, in some cases, I think, temper that adoption with sort of the parameters of what is good client service and what, takes into consideration confidentiality and those sorts of things. There's so many facets to this.
Yeah, I think it's true, Kermit. You don't want people to try to incorporate something into their work too quickly without really having a full understanding of the different impacts it might have on what they're doing. One thing I was also going to point out, John, is that by having a technology that's getting so much attention, it does also kind of bring out the naysayers, the people who don't want to incorporate technology, or being a little bit more vocal about trying to put the brakes on things. So you've got these competing forces of the people who want to jump in before it's necessarily ready. And then you also have the people who want to just not move forward with anything. So you have a lot of different constituencies to consider.
Great. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I think the element of adoption, right? Kermit, you joked about people adopting things before they've even been trained on it. That is a perfect example of, if I see value, if the question, what's in it for me, is answered, then the adoption happens so much more easily. And the other example where you have attorneys saying to attorneys how much value this is, the conversation around chat and a lot of the technology is happening on the lawyer level, right? The best conversations are when they are on the lawyer level and not on the IT to lawyer level, because we love technology by nature. If lawyers hear other lawyers expressing a passion and a desire about something, then by nature, it's going to be higher. The adoption level and the barrier to entry is definitely going to be lower. So one key element of adoption, since we're talking about adoption, is getting the lawyers engaged.
Yeah, that's a beautiful segue. So warning to my panelists, I'm going to change the order a little bit of what we're going to talk about, because John just created this beautiful segue for a topic we wanted to talk about. And that's almost what I think about as like a hidden ROI in this journey, right? We can provide anecdotal evidence and talk about the impact of technology adoption on our clients, the outward facing of our firm, but it becomes so valuable internally when you're successfully having lawyers who are adopting new technology. All of us, I'm sure, when we're thinking back at projects where we established a use case, found an answer, did a proof of concept, brought it into the practice and succeeded, I guarantee 90% of the time it's because we had engaged lawyers involved from the beginning to the end of that process, right? And by pushing adoption into the firm, you develop internal experts who can help support our discussions. But another interesting thing you create, and Kermit, I'm going to throw this to you because I think you have some cool success stories around this at Dave Pitney, is you also have missionaries and evangelists and people who have a credibility within the practice, who probably are the greatest impetus for adoption we have. And Kermit, I'd love for you to chat with us about that.
Yeah, I mean, John, that is 100% correct. And certainly at Dave Pitney, having lawyers, specifically partners who are tech savvy and tech evangelists, really is helpful, because in cases where something as simple as attorneys using the document management system, right, to file, they may not see a whole lot of benefit to themselves. I put stuff in folders in my email. If I need it, it's there. But when a partner explains to them why it's important to get it into the workspace for the client, for the team that's working on this matter, and then they see the benefit of, oh, well, other people are putting stuff in there as well. Now I've got these other precedents I can refer to. those are certainly benefits. So having that sort of evangelist, if you will, in preferably at the partner rank, someone who really is a believer, is certainly helpful. We've also had really good experience where, John, you went through sort of a chronology of, you this project, and sometimes you hit that point where you go, okay, it's out there, it's great, and there's crickets. You haven't had that, somebody to sort of carry the flag with you. That's a risk. Or you just have people who go, well, I'm still doing it my old way, even though you gave me this new thing. And I can certainly talk about an example that we had at Dave Pitney. Maybe this isn't the right time for it, but there's when you have that sort of evangelic person on your side who is like the other lawyers, right? It's not the propeller heads in IT going, you should do this because it's better. It's an attorney going, this impacted the way I service my clients and it made my life easier and I got my billings in more quickly or whatever. They go, oh, that makes sense. So that's the one sort of takeaway for sure, I would say, for everybody attending this, is when you can make that connection with some attorneys in your firm and get them to be your best friends, make them friends of the family, right? And let them go out there and carry the flag for you.
Yeah, and an interesting dynamic to that. And I think about we just spoke about how all of this is accelerating. I think there used to be an old notion in innovation that legal innovation will come about when those who have not innovated will retire, and those who have grown up in a world where technology is available, rampant, they were interested into it. We see a lot more of computer science undergrads moving to the law, that somehow that's how we're going to innovate. I would posture that the speed at which this industry is changing it now will not allow for that kind of death of the dinosaur. I hate to put it this way because I'm one, that meteor hits the earth, kills all the dinosaurs, and all this wonderful new life comes up, right? That's not the paradigm. And Leslie, a question I'll throw to you is, Kermit talked about the power, when you find these evangelists, you help them, any experience when you can't find one, how you might go about making one?
Oh, I think it applies in all cases. You have to find that person. You have to think about, well, first of all, you have to make sure that what you want to deploy actually has value. So if you're having difficulty finding someone who's going to be your champion for this new technology, you might need to back up and think about whether or not it is a technology that you should be introducing to your firm. Because if there's utility, you should be able to find people who are supportive. And just to back up on the senior attorney bashing, sometimes people who have been around for a long time can really appreciate how things used to be done and the utility of what you're trying to introduce, because sometimes with the younger attorneys, they don't understand how difficult things used to be or how time-consuming things might have been in the past, and how introducing this technology really is an advance. Whereas someone who's been practicing 20 or 30 years will understand, oh, in the past, we had to do all these manual things to get to this point. And this is amazing that we now have this new tool that will get us there much more quickly and accurately. So I guess I'm not really addressing your question, but I think if there's a problem finding someone who's going to really be an evangelist for the technology, then you need to think about if it's the right technology. And if you really think it is the right technology, then you have to, kind of do the Simon Sinek, start with why. You have to be able to make the business case to them for why they should want to adopt this into their practice. And I think in any organization, you can always find someone who's on board, and preferably it'll be someone who has the ear of other people at the firm. But if you can find someone to pilot the tool for you and then really kind of provide testimonials on how successful it was using that tool, I think you can find someone to be that person for you.
Mm-hmm. Should come as no surprise to anyone who knows Leslie and I that her answer was way better than my question. So thank you for departing from that. Yeah, going back a little bit, I think one thing that's true across our industry, and I think this is something everyone will recognize, the loudest voice in any firm are the clients, right? When they're not, we're all in a lot of trouble. When we don't listen to our clients, we all know what happens. So an interesting driver for adoption, and this becomes part of the internal sales process. But love to talk a little bit about, in all of your experiences, how are you seeing the increased demand being expressed by the clients for this, and how can you turn that into an asset for the adoption journey?
Well, I don't know, I was going to say, Kermit, do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. I guess we were both sort of looking at each other, offering first dibs. One of the things is certainly nowadays, and we've talked about this a little bit so far, right, with the AI discussion, but the clients their expectations, they expect them to be met, right? Pretty simple. Whether it is a response to a security assessment, whether it is your response to an RFP that outlines the types of tools you use and who the team's going to be and the diversity aspects, right? The clients they're not shy about saying to their attorneys, to their counsel, what are you going to do for me? And so in many cases, that will rapidly drive the internal discussions around, well, can we do this for the client? Can we meet their expectations? And if for some reason we can't, then how do we rapidly change that, in a way that is going to be adopted internally? Because it can't, if it's for a client, it can't just be sort of done begrudgingly. It's got to be part of the fabric at that point. How do we really get that in, get this team either using this tool or following this process or agreeing to these billing terms or whatever it is, and then be able to show that back to the client that yes, we're responsive, we're capable of doing what it is that you need to bring this to a successful close.
And I think it's kind of the reason my title is client value versus innovation, because it really is, you do have to focus on what's going to benefit the clients. And I think if you find a good client who's forward thinking, they can be your best ally as far as adoption. Because if you have attorneys who are a little reluctant to try something, if you have a client who is saying, no, this is what we want, and this is how we want to do things, and we want you to partner with us to get that thing done, then the attorneys are going to be a bit more on board and understand the value that what you're trying to introduce will bring to the client. So I can think of a couple of instances where I've been on a team and we have something that we think is wonderful and we want to get it out to the clients, and we're having a hard time getting the attorneys to introduce it to their clients. And then you'll have a couple of clients who will just on their own reach out and ask for something. And then finally, the partner's ears perk up and they're like, okay, you talked about this thing and now my client's asking for it. And then that's a great way to push things forward. The same is true as if there's a technology you're eyeing and you don't yet have in the firm. If the clients are saying, we want you to start using this type of technology, I think it helps all of our causes as far as, getting the business case and the buy-in and moving things on a little faster.
Yeah, one thing that, an interesting discussion we had when we were preparing for this panel is sort of the evolution of the RFP, right? And that's a way that a client often expresses what they want, right? And I remember going back when I was working in innovation, and the marketing department would send you the RFP. Oh, the client asked, what do we do at the firm for innovation? And we got to go shuffle all our boilerplate and throw it. I'm sure Kermit and IT, you get those too. They want to know about our system, so you throw it to them. Then it evolved to, they want to know what tools we have. So we'd go ahead and give them a list of the tools. Well, they've gotten smart. And now I see more on RFPs, that question has evolved into, what technologies are you going to bring to bear on the value you're going to deliver to me as a client through this engagement? And when you think about the evolution of that query, that's adoption with a capital A, right? It's not, don't give me the grocery list of what you bought. Don't even tell me just what you use, but what are you going to use for me? And how are you going to create value for me? And it's definitely put a strain on people in innovation. It's gotten much more complicated to think about those queries, but let's celebrate our welcome into the RFP process and the thoughtful part of it, because that's great that our firms are thinking of it that way. Whenever you talk about training and adoption, a real common thing you hear all the time is precious. The attorney time is the commodity that we sell as a law firm to make money. Anytime you want to take time away from their practice, it better be worth it, right? And whether you're training them, whether adopting, you really better have a reason. And I think we've kind of covered a lot of those kind of issues in our discussion. So I want to talk about another component of time that maybe is not treated as preciously as it should. And I think this will resonate with our audience. And that's how valuable the time is of those who work in the firm supporting the attorneys. And how in many of our firms, the operations departments that have to tackle things like training and adoption and technology appointment are already spread very thin. So to just take this adoption cause and lay it at the feet of professional development, well, maybe ignoring all the things they have to do just to keep everyone trained up and able to use the things every firm needs to use every day to operate. Right. So maybe laying it right there is not fairly thinking about their time and their resources and how much better adoption can be if it was a fuller collaboration, across the firm. So putting Leslie and Kermit on the spot before I put John on the spot, in your firms, when you think about adoption, who owns it? Is it a collaborative journey, or is there another way to think about adoption where that burden is shared more widely across the firm? And I will start with Kermit, so you guys don't have to do that weird looking at each other to see who's going to talk first thing.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Certainly, in our case, there is a real good marriage between what we call our OTD area, training and development, our IT group, and certainly some of the other administrative areas. And the reason why I think that works really well is because there's a constant feedback loop, right? So whether it's an attorney or it's the legal support staff or it's administrative areas, if there's something that's either not working well or is perceived as could be working better, that feedback loop goes back to OTD. They're able to say, okay, so how do we present this to our population to really show them the benefits of this new thing, or clicking this instead of that? And that really has helped to drive sort of the population taking in and adopting things. I mentioned earlier, there's an example that I think is worthwhile talking about. Like everybody else, we went through COVID, right? We all went remote 3+ years ago. And at the same time, we rolled out a new phone system that had a mobile component to it, Cisco WebEx. And there was, I would say, some pushback to adopting WebEx because people had their mobile phones and they were just used to, attorneys were used to contacting their clients being called on their mobile phones. They weren't really seeing the benefits of this phone system that with this integration. And so we, IT, provided some feedback to OTD, and we got feedback from the attorney population about why it wasn't working for them, or why they were just going to keep doing what they were doing. And so OTD did a phenomenal job. We called them hackathons. They did 15-minute sessions showing the attorneys, make this setting change if you want to do this to forward your calls or not forward your calls, do this so that it looks like you're dialing from the office instead of your mobile phone. People loved it. Attorneys, OTD ran those sessions, I believe, for about a week, 15-minute slots throughout the day, and you would just pop in and they'd go through it, once or twice, and then you'd leave. And the feedback we got was amazing. And I give all the credit to our OTD folks because they were smart enough to take that feedback and turn it into something actionable that really impacted the way the attorneys work.
Great. Leslie?
I think it's the responsibility of many different people at the firm, but it really depends on what it is that you're trying to get people to adopt. There's some things that are enterprise-wide where I think it's really appropriate to have your professional development or your IT trainers kind of own that area where they have to teach a lot of people. I think it works to kind of do an introduction, and then as Kermit did at Dave Pitney, is you kind of do, I don't know if it's kind of on demand or just in time type training when the people really have the need to use the technology. They know there's someone they can turn to give them a refresher and incorporate it into their work. I think it's a little trickier when you're dealing with practice specific type technologies and tools, because then you can't really roll out a program that you're introducing to the entire firm. You have to really think about the needs of those particular people and how they get their work done. So one of the things that we're working on is identifying the life cycle of different types of matters, and then working with individual practice groups to talk to them about the specific things that they can do during different phases of the work that they're doing, because that way, not only are they learning the tool, but it makes sense because it's incorporated into their legal practice. How we're rolling that out is we have to partner with the training people, and then my team, which are, the legal project managers and the innovation managers, to really understand what the needs are of the team, and then, kind of make the tools to purpose that we introduce to them. So it really, I guess adoption really is kind of a holistic approach. You need the trainers and the professional development people to kind of teach us how to communicate that to people, help us put together the materials and determine what's going to be the proper delivery. But then you also need people who really understand the practices to sometimes present that information, because they're going to understand they're going to understand best how it's going to be used by the attorneys. So it's sometimes who owns it can depend upon what it is that you're trying to get people to adopt.
Interesting. And John, you have spent your career as a strategic partner in solving these problems for firms, right? As someone who can come alongside and provide expertise and additional resources. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, the role you can have and the role that a strategic partner can have in coming alongside firms and helping them think about and solve these problems.
Yes, I've been fascinated as I've listened to the conversation, because I think what we've done a great job personally, pat each other on the back, of explaining is how to make this happen. What are the elements that need to go into place, kind of the ingredients that need to make the bread rise, if you will. And there's a lot to it, right? You have to engage people. You have to learn what's going on in their practice groups. We talked about getting down in the weeds with the practice groups, that if we're not actually knowing how they're working and what they're doing and the challenges they're facing, how in God's name can we come in and provide a solution to a problem we don't even understand? So we've been very fierce advocates for many years of professional development and what I call IT training, taking leading roles in really getting their knees and their hands dirty in practice groups, embedding themselves, if you will, in the practice group to really see how it works, and then formulating solutions, working with all the different resources that we've identified to coming up with those solutions that we've figured out. And Kermit talked about how once you know what the problem is and then you find a solution, man, they love it. The only caveat I would add to that is that takes a lot of work. And it requires an agreement and a buy-in from everybody that, okay, we're going to allow these people to do that. And we're going to carve out the time to do that. And where we find, or I've found historically where the stumbling block comes is, I would love to do that. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this when I've had conversations at ILTACON with trainers and training managers about doing just this. We would love to do that. But we've got new hire training every single week of the year, and they just don't have the time. So I will simply say that that's where our team can come in. And that's when we have had conversations with firms and they've seen that this is where they want to take things. We're able to come in and take the low-hanging fruit typically of the new hire training, and then they can just get in and go, and they can make the adoption happen.
Great. Thank you. One final topic before we spin to questions. I know we've gone a little past the 30, but we were also eloquent and long-winded in introducing ourselves, and I want to steal a few more minutes of substance here at the end. Walking alongside in our firms, this innovation journey is also a data journey, right? And it's become very prevalent in the firms basically to declare if we can't measure it, we don't want to be doing it. So maybe a loaded question, a question that hasn't been completely thought through yet, because I think sometimes data and measuring success and failure is a little bit of smoke that just when it takes form and looks like something tangible, you reach for it and your hand goes right through it. But despite that shortcoming, Kermit and Leslie, and then I have a little twist on this question to throw to John, but in your firms, when you're thinking about, well, how am I measuring my success or failure in adoption? What are the data points that you're looking at?
Well, I can tell you, at Dave Pitney, as I mentioned before, having a partner who's sort of an advocate or an evangelist for your cause is helpful. And I think I even mentioned, sort of using the document management system. You can pretty quickly see who uses the document management system with regularity and how much they file or how much they search and that sort of thing. And so in our case, we actually have a partner who is a technical, advocate, believes in the document management system and is always sort of banging the drum about the value of the content that's in there. And every quarter or so, we will go through and I'll show him, here's who's using it, here's who's not using it. He goes out to those people and talks to them or shows them. And obviously, it used to be he'd actually physically go sit in their office and go, I need 10 minutes. I'm going to show you how to do this. Now it's, it's like this or it's over the phone. And then we're able to see, okay, well, John Smith wasn't filing and he is now, or he wasn't using search and he is now. And so that's a real basic example. There is data out there. And sometimes it'll be more, subjective, I hate to say. You'll get the feedback loop from folks, but there are ways to measure something like this.
Leslie, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think, that the easiest step is most technology now has some type of logging. It can give you the stats, whether or not people are using it. I think it's always interesting to see, did you launch something and a bunch of people logged into it, but then they never went back to it. So they took a look, but they obviously didn't find there was any utility. So those are people you might want to follow up with. Like, I see you had a look at it, but what about it wasn't meeting your needs? I think one of the biggest measures of success is almost more anecdotal, is when people come to you and ask you about something that someone else has told them about, because it was so helpful to this other person that now they want that as well. So I think that's a great indicator of success. Or and John, we kind of experienced this together. We would, do these road shows and go to different offices and talk to people about what was available to them. And the best thing you could have happen was have someone stand up in the presentation and say, oh yeah, I use this all the time. I love this thing. And then ears perk up and people in the audience will come to you. So I feel like when people are asking you either for something they know about, or they know they can come to you and ask you for something they think they want or the client wants, and they know that you can provide them with the solution, I think that's one of your best indicators of adoption.
Yeah, and John, thinking again with your strategic partner hat on, what can third parties do to help firms really think critically about what's succeeding and what's failing, and what sort of consultative role can you play in that process?
I think there's a couple of things to think about here. I agree with both Leslie and Kermit that there's a digital way of tracking whether something is being used, and then there's a more personal way of tracking it. Just simply from the perspective of help desk tickets, just to throw out one example. If you're getting no calls to the help desk about a certain app, there's a pretty good chance that nobody's using it, right? I mean, real simple. If you start doing an educational campaign on an application, and suddenly there's a huge spike in the number of people calling the help desk about this, bingo, you've hit home runs. We as Wilson Allen HBR also happen to have a tool called a utilization and an adoption dashboard. And our team can work with your IT team through various different APIs or technology links to actually measure certain aspects of people's job workflow. And we tag those elements of the workflow, the digital trail that they leave. And then that's presented up in a dashboard where you can see how the different practice groups, different users, different job types over time, geographic locations, office locations, whatever, is being used and not. And so you get a very vivid presentation of what is working and what's not. From the human side, I absolutely agree that it's those stories that make a huge difference. And those are the stories that help push other people over the edge. And I would say if you're going to go after the human side of it, identify 2 or 3 different groups of people and just have a conversation with them before you do some kind of a project, and just find out if this thing even enters into their consciousness, and then have that same conversation with them afterwards. Some of them will say absolutely not, no, I don't care, go away. Other people will tell you that it has. So there is the communicative side of things too, which really does shed some light on how effective you are.
Thank you. With our 5 minutes remaining, Alicia, were there any questions that came up through the Q&A that are on topics we haven't addressed?
We did have a few questions come through. One of them we just answered. How do you measure adoption or success? However, we had another one come through. Mandates around technology use by attorneys is unpopular in most firms. How do you work around that to drive more adoption?
Oh,
In
go
my
ahead, Kermit.
experience- Yeah, my experience has been, it's the what's in it for me, right? I have not yet met an attorney who likes recording their time, but they all do it. Right? We're not at that point where everything is an AFA or everything's a fixed fee matter. So a tool that helps them sort of reconstruct their day. I won't name names, but we all know there's tools out there that can help you reconstruct your day. When that tool helps you find that hour or two that just disappeared during the week because you forgot about the phone call or the conversation or the email or something, then you go, wow, I just got that much closer to the number I know I need to make. And I mean, that's one sort of example, but when there is when you can communicate a what's in it for me as part of technology adoption, that makes it much more palatable, as opposed to saying, you will record time, and clunk somebody on the head with it.
I think I would echo what Kermit is saying. You can't roll out something and dictate that people use it because it's good for the firm. Or, I mean, we all should be doing things that are good for the firms, but everyone's a human being and they want to think about self-gratification. So you really do have to tell them why. Not just why it's going to benefit the firm and why it's going to benefit the clients, but also how it's going to make their work better, how it's going to make their practice better. And sometimes the simple what's in it for me is, what's in it for you is it's going to make your client really, really happy if you do this and you provide this to them, or you handle things in a certain way. And they need to understand the benefit of that, but you also have to make sure it's communicated to people. So you're not just saying, we have this new thing and we want everyone to do it this way. I think you really have to have almost like a campaign, depending on what it is that you're rolling out, that has little success stories of why we're doing this and why it's going to be so beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, mandates are hard, right? We know that they're hard. And one of the things that makes them even harder is in this environment we're in now, where lateral recruitment and stuff is so important. I know for a fact in many of those discussions, one of the selling points is we don't have mandates at our firm, right? You can come here, you can be an entrepreneur, you can own your own practice, you can serve your own clients, you have the freedom to do all of those things. So to then try to push a mandate in firms when that's the message to laterals is difficult. What I have found is a satisfactory, kind of sneaking in the backyard kind of way on this. If I could simply at my prior firms get the topic of technology adoption to come up even superficially in the attorney evaluation conversation, that was a victory for me, right? If you could get a practice leader to say, hey, let's talk a little bit about how you've contributed to innovation or how you've deployed technology. That's different than a mandate. It's a part of the holistic, are you succeeding or are you not? So if I could simply score that as an agenda point in a practice group, in the evaluation of the attorneys, that to me is as close to a mandate victory as you're going to get at almost every firm. So I always appreciate if I could get that small win.
And John, I like that idea, because by having that message coming from different places, it shows that overall to the firm, it's important. It's something that's important to the firm, whether it's during the evaluation period or it's coming from IT or it's coming from professional development. If it's looked at as part of your professionalism and how you're developing within the firm, I think that's a message that goes a long way toward getting people to embrace these technologies and see how they can really benefit them.
Yeah. And with that, I thought, John, go ahead.
From the communication side, I would say, as a suggestion from having done this with many, many, many projects, is don't overkill it. there can be a tendency to try to over whatever expression it is, overcook the something. When you have a message, make it very direct, very small, and very to the point. So I'll give examples that when we're rolling out applications, we'll create these little 30-second video snippets. And all they do is highlight one aspect of what's coming that will make their life easier and help them as a lawyer. And that's all it takes. Now you drip feed one of those every week or 2 weeks for a couple of months, and now people are starting to see the benefit and the value. And especially if you're doing that with a testimonial from one of their peers, that's as good as gold. And so that's what I'm saying. It is better done by drip feeding than a hammer approach.
We'll put the hammer away then, and since we're a few minutes over our time, we'll pay attention to John's encouragement to be to the point and end it here. I want to thank our panelists today. Thank you so much for contributing to this conversation. Also, thank you again to the attendees for investing time. This is a conversation on an important topic we hope to continue over multiple formats and multiple modes of communication. I think there's a lot more to be said. And if this is a topic for which you have a particular passion or insight in, I'd love to just chat with you as, professionals in an industry that care about this going on. I think this is an area like innovation where we need to succeed as a profession, not just as a competitive differentiator. So with that, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.